Good evening, and welcome to the James Martin Memorial Lecture here at the Sheldonian Theatre. My name's Charles Godfrey, and I'm Director of the Oxford Martin School. Jim Martin, founded the school almost exactly 20 years ago. We had our anniversary in June. His vision was for an institution that would work to find solutions to some of the major challenges of our time. But he also understood that these challenges do not fit neatly into the way we structure our university. And his permanent legacy is the Oxford Martin School, and our mission is to bring together teams from across the university to work on subjects as varied as the future of multilateral organizations or antimicrobial resistance. Over its 20 years, it has supported nearly 100 different programs in these different areas. Jim died in 2013, and at this lecture we remember his vision, his insights, and his generosity. And those of us who were privileged to know Jim personally have fond memories of talking to him, his intellectual omnivorousness and his insights, and his just curiosity about everything. I'm delighted to say that Jim's wife Lillian, a frequent and very welcome visitor to the Martin School, is here with us this evening, along with other members of Jim's family. The first James Martin Memorial Lecture was given in 2015 by the then Chancellor of the University, Chris Patten. And it gives me enormous pleasure to say that the seventh lecture will be delivered by a newly appointed Chancellor, Lord Hague. William has had a hugely distinguished career in British politics, after famously bursting onto the political scene at the age of 16 with a barnstorming speech at the Conservative Party conference. He read PPE here at Oxford and entered Parliament in 1989, representing the Yorkshire seat of Richmond. He was very quickly appointed a minister and then a cabinet minister. He was Secretary of State for Wales, where the urgent need to learn Welsh fortuitously led him to meet his future wife, Dame Fionn. In opposition, he was leader of the Conservative Party from 1997 to 2001, and later was Shadow Foreign Secretary and then Foreign Secretary during the coalition government from 2010 to 2014. He stepped down from Parliament in 2015 and the same year moved into the House of Lords. To use, I think it's Dennis Healy's phrase, William is a politician with a hinterland and has written very well-received biographies of Pitt the Younger and William Wilberforce, and today writes insightfully on many topics, both in politics and far beyond. He's also reached out across the aisle to collaborate with Tony Blair on a series of influential reports of how science, technology, and innovation can underlie what they have termed a new national purpose. Jim Martin would have loved to have read those reports. And clearly, Tony Blair has forgiven you for the drubbing that you would regularly give him at Prime Minister's question times. So Lord Hague is superbly qualified to give a lecture in honour of James Martin. And Chancellor, may I invite you to the lectern to talk on environment, health, society, and economics in the new era of geopolitics.
Well, Charles, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for that warm welcome this evening. It's a great honor and pleasure to give this lecture. And may I say, first of all, a big thank you to everyone I've met in Oxford since I was sworn in as the Chancellor in this very room about 9 months ago now. I've been to so many colleges, so many faculties, met so many students and people who just live in Oxford. And I thank you for such a tremendous and warm welcome. I've had one or two interesting encounters. I was showing some distinguished American visitors down Merton Street. I decided to show them myself some of the buildings while they were here. I got overexcited and went down Merton Street, and I said, there's Merton, 1264, there's Corpus, 1517, there's Christchurch, that originally was Cardinal College, and a group of British tourists attached themselves to the and they came along with rapt attention, listening to me all down the street. And then when we got to the end to the outside Corpus, one of them said, "Can I ask you a question, Lord Hague?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Have you fallen on hard times?" She said, "We know you're the Chancellor, but we didn't know you have to double up as a tour guide as well. So I should be more careful in doing that." And I have enjoyed so far speaking to dozens of different events. Perhaps the most unusual was addressing the conference in the town hall on extraterrestrial life and our search for it. But I said I fully empathized with them because I spent 26 years looking for intelligent life in the House of Commons. And so I know what it feels like. And it's a great pleasure to speak on this important occasion, the 20 years of the Martin School and the 7th lecture for the Martin School, and it's a great pleasure to be here. The world is undergoing the fastest technological revolution in the history of humanity, with everything from CRISPR and quantum to AI and robotics, disrupting our economies, societies, and even what it means to be human. And as the impacts of new technologies intersect with other deep geopolitical currents, including growing instability and conflict, demographic change of unprecedented rapidity, and accelerating climate change, the world is entering a new phase of history that I want to try to describe tonight, with both intensified risks and unparalleled opportunities. And that technology would create challenges as well as opportunities was clear to James Martin. Born to a working-class family in Leicestershire, he came to study physics at Keble on the back of a scholarship in 1950. After his national service in the army, he worked on computer systems at IBM before writing books on what the future of computing would mean for society and establishing a software consultancy. As early as the 1970s, he could evidently see the kind of opportunities and risks that technology would bring. He predicted the decline of printed newspapers, the impact on wealth and income inequality, and even the rise of mobile phones, online dating, and designer babies. His commitment to finding new ways of dealing with these kinds of challenges led him to fund a new school at Oxford designed to study these and other issues. Above all, he believed that we can make any kind of world we want, as is written in his memory on the plaque that I just walked past at the entrance to the Martin School. We can make any kind of world we want. This is an important lesson that we have to remember now, that no matter how bad things are, we must never lose our sense of agency. We must continue to ensure that rational people do not consign themselves to be the victims of history, but resolve to be the agents of pushing history in the right direction. Thanks to James's generosity, our university, our country, and the world are fortunate to have the Oxford Martin School to help us make sense of this new age of disruption. While much of Westminster and Whitehall struggle to respond to these changes, this school and many other people in this university are setting out practical measures to respond across 4 key areas: the environment, the economy, health, and society. In the last year alone, the Martin School has led research into how AI modeling of population health can be used to monitor and control the spread of pathogens, analyze the potential of new agent-based economic modeling to improve analysis of policy decisions, explored how decentralized social media platforms like Mastodon could empower people online by offering an alternative to algorithmic manipulation, tested the extent to which taxes like VAT could be reformed to incentivize people to eat more healthily, and set out proposals for reforming the Wildlife Trade Convention, CITES, an issue close to my heart as co-chair of the Prince of Wales United for Wildlife initiative. I fear that we will be in need of even more of these kinds of excellent initiatives in the years ahead, although all of us hope that the chaotic merry-go-round of geopolitics on which we're traveling will soon slow down. For the foreseeable future, it is likely to keep spinning faster and faster. And the way I have come to think of this change in world events is by imagining the kind of book on world history that a future historian might write decades from now. My books were about the 18th century, but I often think, if I was living in the future and writing about the 21st century, where are we in the book? What would the chapters be called in that book? And in the lecture I gave at the Blavatnik School of Government earlier in the year, I tried to analyze geopolitical events through the 3 chapters of the world since the Second World War. And I want to use and extend that structure in my remarks this evening. The first chapter of the book, if I was writing the book of the world since 1945, would be entitled Danger, the Cold War between 1945 and 1989. Danger, but with equilibrium. After the Second World War, it was a time of immense risk, with the threat of nuclear warfare between the West and the USSR casting a dark shadow across the world. At the height of the Cold War in 1986, these 2 blocs had 69,000 nuclear warheads pointed at each other. Nuclear disaster was sometimes only narrowly avoided in a number of near misses, as in the Cuban Missile Crisis. But there were other dangers too. The Soviet Union's Biopreparat initiative was the largest known biological weapons program in history and included the development of weaponized smallpox. Growth in the West gave way to stagflation and deindustrialization, creating significant economic and societal challenges. The export of the USSR's brand of authoritarianism to dozens of countries around the world fomented anxieties in the West about the future of democracy and the slide towards animal farm-style totalitarianism. While climate change did not enter mainstream consciousness until towards the end of the Cold War, warnings from those such as US oceanographer Roger Revelle that the large amounts of CO2 pumped into the atmosphere amounted, in his words, to a large-scale geophysical experiment only added to the mounting issues for the future. However, there was a degree of equilibrium with all of this. A lot of these dangers were avoided in the end because the West and the USSR were able to work together constructively in spite of their rivalry. Through the Pugwash conferences on science and world affairs launched in the 1950s, scientists from East and West were able to establish a dialogue on issues like nuclear weapons. These conferences led to a series of international agreements, from the Test Ban Treaty to the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, establishing significant controls on US and Soviet nuclear weapons. Working together through the World Health Organization, the world was able to eradicate smallpox in 1980, a disease that plagued people across the world for 3,000 years. Despite the dangers, a lot of progress was also made across the realms of economics, society, health, and the environment. Between 1950 and the end of the Cold War, the proportion of the world's population living in extreme poverty fell, between 1950 and the end of the Cold War, it fell from 59% to 38%, a fall equivalent to 1.1 billion people. Women's role in Western society shifted, the proportion of women working in the United States doubling between 1950 and 1990. By 1990, the average child born in the world could expect to live 20 years longer than one born in 1950. So that was our first chapter, danger, but with equilibrium. The second chapter of the modern history of the world comes with the fall of the Iron Curtain, taking us on to a new chapter. And that title, in my mind, would be Excitement, with a new equilibrium, an American-led equilibrium, as the Cold War era of danger with equilibrium gave way to a golden age of relative peace and prosperity across the world. Some, of course, thought we had reached the end of history, with communism collapsed and democracy ascendant. Within a year of the Berlin Wall coming down, Germany had been reunified. Within 15 years, most of the USSR's satellite states in Europe had joined the European Union. Many exciting advances were made in this period. In 1992, countries around the world signed up to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, agreeing a process to limit emissions, from which landmark agreements like Kyoto and Paris have flowed. With the risk of war seemingly gone, liberal democracies shifted defense budgets into public services, leading to a peace dividend of prosperity. Many democracies like the UK became more accepting of people from different walks of life, from ethnic minorities to gay people. Furthermore, the equilibrium provided by states working with each other for the common good expanded after the Cold War, and the world became a safer place. The US and Russia agreed nuclear reduction treaties that saw those 69,000 warheads fall to just 17,000 by 2010. The Kremlin ended its bioweapons program. Having triumphed over the Soviet Union, the liberal democracies believed that economic liberalism could incentivize China to follow Russia in adopting democracy, and it was admitted into the World Trade Organization. Of course, there were also many challenges. Peace was not universal, with horrific war crimes committed during the breakup of Yugoslavia and its aftermath, genocide in Rwanda. Nor will any of us old enough to remember 9/11 or the 7/7 bombings forget what we saw on those days. Western states made mistakes in the interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan. Racism, misogyny, and homophobia remained present in our societies. But compared to the majority of human history, most of us felt, to borrow from one of my predecessors as Chancellor, that we had never had it so good. I feel that my generation of baby boomers, I was really a late baby boomer, who came of age towards the end of the Cold War and were fully able to enjoy the peace dividends of the 1990s and 2000s, is the luckiest generation that has ever lived in human history. In the mid-2010s, though, from then on, it's going on now, we entered a new era, a third chapter in the book I have in my mind. And if the first chapter was danger, and the second chapter was excitement, the title of the third chapter in which we are living now is Danger and Excitement, but with no equilibrium this time. Not just a combination of the previous two chapters, but something entirely different to either of them. Danger and excitement with no equilibrium. Each of us knows that we have entered a period of greater instability in the last decade. European economic growth has flatlined in the wake of the financial crash. Democracies have grown more inward-looking. Populism and extremism are on the rise, and autocrats have become emboldened by the West's problems and retreat. In the area of technology, of course, progress has not slowed down. Quite the contrary. Advances in artificial intelligence in the last few years have the potential to turbocharge productivity and economic growth. Meanwhile, advances in gene editing have unlocked new treatments for genetic disorders like sickle cell disease, as well as mRNA vaccines, which can help inoculate against diseases, as well as provide more effective immunotherapy treatments for cancer patients. Tremendous advances in healthcare. What has slowed down is the extent to which states are willing to work with each other for the common good. Gone are the days when the geopolitical rivals like the US and USSR could agree on nuclear arms constraints. Look at what has happened in the last year with the US and China, trading tit-for-tat tariffs and export controls. And certainly no new nuclear arms agreement. We have entered an age of danger, excitement, and weakening global governance. And this combination of danger and excitement is particularly difficult for the human brain, for boards of executives, for cabinets of ministers to grapple with, because all of us tend to prefer the clarity of either optimism or pessimism. We will need to learn how to hold both of these states in our mind at the same time, because the world today is both the most exciting time to be alive in the history of humanity, but also the most dangerous time to be alive since the end of the Second World War. And this is clear across all four themes of the Oxford Martin School's focus. On the environment, there are exciting advances in technology that could improve our ability to cut carbon emissions and to save the natural world. The energy density of lithium-ion batteries has increased threefold over the last 30 years, making electric cars ever more viable. Advances in gene editing are allowing us to create drought-resistant crops that can better weather the impact of climate change. And there are promising signs that plants can be edited to improve their ability to sequester carbon. Oxford scientists have developed a new superfood supplement that increases the likelihood of bees surviving into adulthood 15-fold. Companies like Colossal Biosciences are working to end extinction itself. These advances are all the more important given the limited progress we've made on protecting our environment. Last week's UN forecasts showed that the world is on course for 2.8 degrees of global warming, with levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere still rising. Experts have found evidence that key ocean currents are weakening faster than we thought, raising the potential for the Gulf Stream to collapse in our lifetimes. Deforestation and the wildlife trade in developing countries has been increasing, leading to greater risks of a new pandemic. The international community is failing to rise sufficiently to these challenges, even though great progress is being made in renewable energy. The United States has left the Paris Agreement, and for all of China's huge investment in renewable technology, that country's carbon emissions have still increased more than 20% since the Paris Agreement. Turning to health, there are again both exciting opportunities and severe threats. As with the environment, scientists and civil society are leading most of the progress being made on health. The Oxford AstraZeneca COVID vaccine, which was designed and manufactured in just 10 months during the pandemic, was able to save over 6 million lives around the world in its first year of rollout. This shows just what progress can be made when enough resources are made available to scientists and regulation is streamlined. Going forward, AI has the potential to help discover new drugs faster and cheaper, with a simulation of protein folding and chemical reactions, allowing potential drug candidates within weeks instead of years. Meanwhile, new drugs offer a new path to reduce obesity and drive economic productivity. For example, analysis suggests that giving weight loss vaccines to 15 million eligible overweight adults would cut the welfare bill by £2 billion in this country within 5 years and save the economy over £50 billion by the middle of the century. Many of the biggest dangers, though, revolve around biosecurity. 5 years on from COVID, we might like to pretend that it was a once-in-a-lifetime event, but the UK government's National Risk Register puts the likelihood of another severe pandemic in the next 5 years as high as 25%. Given the growth of vaccine skepticism and health conspiracy theories, we could struggle in the future to inoculate some populations when the next pandemic hits. And there are signs to suggest that the next pandemic will be even more severe. AI biological design tools have the potential to be misused to create pathogens that are more deadly or vaccine resistant, while scientists have warned that nascent efforts to create mirror DNA could lead to the extinction of all life. Leaving aside these existential risks, more familiar health challenges are worsening. Healthy life expectancy has lagged increases in overall life expectancy, meaning that people will live longer in poor health, with significant costs in both individuals' quality of life and society's public spending. Cancers are becoming more common in young people under the age of 50, perhaps as a result of growing levels of obesity, physical inactivity, and ultra-processed foods. Again, nation-states are failing to cooperate on these challenges. The United States is withdrawing from the World Health Organization, weakening existing data-sharing arrangements and the new WHO pandemic agreement. There is little to no progress being made on creating international safeguards around AI biological design tools or DNA synthesis screening requirements. Advances in technology, if properly utilized, could unlock significant growth in the world economy. We could use AI and robotics to save time doing the things we don't want to do and free up more time to spend on all the things we do want to do. Technology can also, for example, help reduce human rights abuses in our supply chains. Chemists at MIT recently designed a cobalt-free battery, which could reduce our dependence on cobalt mined by children in the DRC. A spin-out from the University of Minnesota is leading a promising initiative to manufacture magnets without rare earth elements, which could help countries break free of China's chokehold over these critical minerals. Meanwhile, blockchain and AI are increasingly being deployed as a way of uncovering slavery in our supply chains. Yet technology also brings significant risks for the economy. AI is likely to cause significant disruption to professional jobs, while future advances in robotics could create further pressure on manual jobs. If the speed at which new jobs are created by these technologies and displaced workers can be retrained to fit into them, we could be looking at much higher unemployment in the coming years. Meanwhile, the concentration of tech companies in the US and China could lead to a significant fall in tax receipts for other countries as AI begins to displace workers, given the tech industry's poor record in paying taxes outside of their own country. These impacts are likely to heap further pressure on an unstable global economy. While we have grown accustomed to countries reducing their trade barriers, we're now in a period of new tariffs, often erratically announced. China has shown this year their willingness to weaponize export controls over critical minerals, threatening Western supply chains essential for defense and renewable energy. The WTO now forecasts that goods trade will grow just 0.5% next year, down from its 2.5% earlier forecast. Risky lending in the private credit markets, growing links between cryptocurrencies and the real economy through stable coins, and concerns about overvalued tech companies all suggest some kind of financial crisis in the next few years is becoming more likely. But even before these recent challenges, some Western economies have been in decline. Productivity in Europe has stagnated since the 2008 crash. Furthermore, as our economy has slowed down and public services have come under pressure, European aid budgets have dwindled, reducing our ability to support the world's poorest. The international cooperation to remedy these challenges has not been sufficient. There have been some small steps towards reform of the World Trade Organization, with China ceding their developing country status for future negotiations, while the UK has agreed to join the multi-party interim appeal arbitration arrangement. But wider reform of the WTO still feels far off. The Trump administration has signaled plans to reform the IMF, with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent criticizing the organization for devoting too much time to work on climate change, gender, and social issues. Meanwhile, the OECD Pillar 1 negotiations, which sought to rewrite the rules on taxing cross-border digital services to ensure tech companies paid their fair share, have now stalled. So across environment and health, we have those issues. Societal challenges are just as serious as all these others, including the economy that I've just described. Most notably, in the last few years, we have seen a resurgence in conflicts around the world, including the wars in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, Ethiopia, the Sahel, and Myanmar. Nor is the age of renewed conflict going away anytime soon. To ensure NATO is able to repel a Russian attack, Secretary General Mark Rutte has warned the alliance needs a 400% increase in air and missile defenses, millions more artillery shells, thousands of new tanks and armored vehicles, and significant expansion in logistics and transport. Meanwhile, some kind of confrontation over Taiwan is becoming increasingly likely in the coming years as China steps up its strength and activity in the South China Sea. Aside from conventional threats, some states are deploying new tools to wage gray zone warfare against democratic societies. Cyber attacks on European countries have surged since the Ukraine war began, with the UK government recently warning that Russia can now turn the lights off for millions of people. Russia is using AI and social media to conduct electoral interference campaigns in Western countries, designed to exploit legitimate grievances, collapse support for liberal democracies, and help anti-NATO populist parties into power. In the last few years, disinformation campaigns have been mounted in Moldova, Romania, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic. In Western countries, we have many societal challenges that populists and foreign states are looking to exploit. Migration has become a major domestic political issue. Meanwhile, social media has contributed, in my view, to high levels of anxiety and loneliness, which the increasing use of AI companion chatbots would only increase. International cooperation is again lacking. While issues like migration and standards for social media companies would be best dealt with through international cooperation, Western countries are split on how to approach these challenges and have instead embarked upon their own piecemeal reforms. Meanwhile, free societies face the need to do more to defend themselves, but some have been slow to recognize this. We will need to do much more in this third chapter of modern history to protect society from external attack and internal fragmentation. And yet, in many places, there are exciting initiatives rising to the occasion to try and fight back against these dangers. There's been a surge in defense technology startups seeking to help Western countries maintain their edge and deter aggression. In countries closer to the front line, like Poland, civilians are flocking towards military training to help protect their homes. Here in the UK, people are joining our joint cyber reserve force and taking courses at the UK Resilience Academy to help insulate our country from grey zone attacks. And on social media, campaign groups like Smartphone Free Childhood spring up to help parents protect their children from the worst of social media for as long as they can. So across the areas of the environment, health, economy, and society, we can see that the world has entered a new age of both danger and excitement, but with no equilibrium provided by international cooperation. These dangers are linked. For example, the social media damage to society again, in my view, that I mentioned, has added to a mental health epidemic, forcing people out of work, thereby damaging health and the economy. The challenges of aging healthily means that people are dropping out of the workforce earlier, creating economic challenges and incentivizing mass migration. The rise of obesity and mental illness is leading to greater public spending on health and welfare, with a huge cost to individuals and taxpayers. Rapid climate change will accelerate all these economic, security, and demographic challenges. The links between these growing issues could easily create a poly-crisis, with challenges spilling over into one another and causing more damage. But the positive thought here is that the links between these crises mean that for every small step we take towards addressing some of the challenges, the benefits will ripple out into the other areas as well. Marginal gains in one area can make a big difference in others. So, having moved from an era of danger with equilibrium to an era of excitement with new equilibrium, to today's era of danger and excitement with no equilibrium, where do we go from here? What can individuals, institutions, societies, and states do to thrive in a world that is more dangerous and more exciting at the same time? The first thing we will all need is a new mindset. It is difficult to hold the competing narratives of risk and opportunity in our heads at the same time. It is very difficult to plan what to do as an individual, organization, or government if you don't know whether things are about to get much better or much worse. There are three key aspects of this new mindset we will need to thrive in today's era of danger, excitement, and instability. First is strengthening the connections between different disciplines. The growing connections between environmental, economic, societal, and health-related challenges means that each of us will not be able to understand what will happen next without a broader understanding of related trends. For example, I find, having focused most of my own career on politics and economics, that I now need to study science and technology to have any idea of what will happen next in politics and economics. We are likely now entering an age in which generalists will need more than one area of specialist knowledge in order to thrive. Second, we need to cultivate resilience, which will be critical if we are to withstand the shocks that forthcoming crises will inflict upon us. To achieve this resilience, we will need the third key aspect of our new mindset: reinvention. In this new age of danger and excitement, people, institutions, and countries that only do things the old way, just because that's the way things have always been done, will quickly fall by the wayside. And to date, the response of many states, organizations, and individuals to this new age of insecurity has been trying to achieve resilience through some kind of retrenchment, doubling down on old ideas. On the environment, we need to drive forward innovation and technology to limit climate change because the world is failing to decarbonize fast enough. On health in the UK, we need to target more of the health budget towards preventing illness rather than responding to it. On the economy, we need to cultivate a dynamic, tech-focused economy with genuine growth potential rather than thinking that building infrastructure always produces growth. We can also do more to invest more in technological solutions that can reduce our dependence on critical minerals for manufacturing batteries and magnets, for defense or renewable energy. On social issues, we need to create alternatives to the way social media works to get today, rather than wringing our hands about it. Moving away from seeking resilience through retrenchment and towards securing resilience through reinvention will be critical for thriving in an age of danger and excitement. So what would applying this principle of resilience through reinvention look like in practice across the 4 key challenges we have been discussing? With regard to the environment, it is a fact that climate change is accelerating. It is a fact we are not on course to limit global warming to below the 1.5-degree target, with the UN calculating that the world is on course for 2.8 degrees. Developing countries are not getting the financial support they need to decarbonize. While these facts have become politically unpopular, facts they remain. For all of the Trump administration's efforts to reduce American action on climate change, or the political trend away from addressing these issues, or simple denial in some places, the science has not changed. The world is still on track for climate change with catastrophic impacts across the globe. And that is why, no matter the political headwinds, institutions such as our university must continue to lead research into the ways in which we can limit and adapt to climate change. As the impacts of climate change increase, with very serious consequences beginning to emerge in the 2030s and 2040s, resilience through reinvention will be critical. To build resilience to the climate crisis, there must be no going back on the COP process, but we will increasingly need to develop new technologies on top of the ones we know today. For example, new gene-edited crops can be developed to better thrive in harsher climates, while AI-based weather models, like the one developed last year by our physics department, can improve early warning systems for climate-related disasters. Direct air capture is another technology we will need to develop at scale if we are to offset continued high levels of carbon emissions from polluting countries. As the International Energy Agency has noted, increasing research, development, and demonstration spending to drive innovation in direct air capture technologies at a national and global level will be essential in the near term. It is also worth exploring the science of controversial geoengineering techniques, such as sun-reflecting particles and brightening reflective clouds, using sprays of seawater and so on. There are strong reasons not to use unpredictable methods to alter the Earth's weather. However, there is also a case to start research now to understand how these techniques work, as other countries and organizations are likely to deploy them. While geoengineering is an uncomfortable area, it is unlikely to be one which we can ignore. And I'm glad that the UK's Advanced Research Agency is already leading research into how it might work in practice. When it comes to building resilience in healthcare, we need to reinvent our approach to focus on prevention, rapid response, and healthy aging. Given the Office of Budget Responsibility has warned that the UK's aging population and rising costs of healthcare and other age-related expenditures are projected to push our debt above 270% of GDP later in the centuries, which is far beyond any bond market likelihood of financing it, this is an issue of fundamental importance. We will need to reinvent the relationship between the state and the individual when it comes to healthcare. While this is a challenge many developed countries are dealing with, the need for reinvention is particularly acute in this one in the UK. Our NHS is now expected to cope with many rare and complex health issues for which it was never designed, along with chronic illnesses often driven by poor lifestyles. At present, political parties are far too shy about the interventions to incentivize people to live healthier lives, with many decrying well-targeted interventions like the sugar tax as evidence of a nanny state. A healthy population is now a matter of vital national interest across all nations of the world, but particularly in the UK. We must not allow people to be left to the mercy of a cycle of junk food in which they have become trapped. Second, we need to embrace new technologies that can help spot health problems early and treat them swiftly before they become harder and more expensive to treat. Almost every day, new advances in diagnosis are being made. For example, last month, scientists announced they had built a human disease blood atlas, a potential early warning system to flag the risk of diseases such as cancers by monitoring the levels of thousands of blood proteins. Earlier this year, doctors unveiled a new AI stethoscope capable of diagnosing 3 deadly heart disease conditions in just 15 seconds. These kinds of tests can transform healthcare across the world. To make full use of them in the UK, we could launch a nationwide preventative health program that would sit alongside the NHS and mainstream these kinds of early diagnosis. I have called for a new metagenomic screening effort at UK airports, which would help us spot new pathogens as they enter our country, helping us respond faster to novel threats. Cultivating resilience in our economies will also require reinventing the role of the state and the use of technology. Governments will need to take a more active role in partnerships with the private sector, particularly in order to secure sovereign capabilities in key technologies and the materials used for them. We are already seeing the United States adopting the kind of state capitalism interventions we would have expected to see in China. The Trump administration recently took stakes in the chipmaker Intel and the mining company Trilogy Metals and rare earths miner MP Materials. As I set out in a new paper with Tony Blair earlier this month, quantum is a coming technology that the UK is well positioned to lead on. But we will only be able to do so if the government ensures our companies have access to the capital, the talent, and the light touch regulation necessary to scale up domestically. Again, this gear shift in economic policy is one to which many countries around the world will struggle to adapt, in particular in Europe and possibly here in the UK. The political right will need to accept that when countries like China and the US are intervening so heavily in technology and critical minerals, we will also need a robust industrial strategy backed by an active state. As AI and robotics disrupt the workforce, the right will also need to take a greater role in supporting displaced workers to reinvent themselves and their skills to fit into new roles. Meanwhile, the political left will need to realize that we cannot grow the economy by focusing solely on infrastructure projects. They should look to the findings of the current Nobel Economics Prize winners, the 3 of them, who have shown that innovation is the key driver of growth, and the conclusion of Mario Draghi's report on European competitiveness, which found that the disparity in productivity between Europe and the United States is almost entirely explained by the tech sector. The political left will also need to recognize that a small number of talented and highly paid entrepreneurs play a huge role in delivering this innovation-led growth, and that driving any of them overseas is no way to grow our economy or tax receipts. Societal resilience is an area where far more action must be taken too, especially in Europe, first of all relating to defense. NATO countries need to urgently prepare their populations for the risk of conflict in the next decade. Many countries, such as the Nordic states, have adopted national service models. At the very least, the UK government must do more to support individuals to prepare for mass blackouts or internal internet disruption from increased conflict, for which too few people are currently prepared. Greater resilience will be necessary not only for crises, but also slow-burning societal ills. All of us across the world will need to reinvent our approach to social media and AI-generated content, and how we go about critical thinking and civil discourse. Above all, we will need to redesign how social media platforms work. As Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the Internet, of the World Wide Web, and alumnus of Oxford, has set out in his new book, This Is for Everyone, there are a growing number of academics, entrepreneurs, and startups pushing for non-addictive, privacy-first social networks. There are a growing number of bright spots on the horizon here. We are seeing growing numbers of decentralized social media platforms like Mastodon and Blue Sky, Tim Berners-Lee's new solid digital wallets can allow individuals and organizations to own their own data. And there is growing interest in regulating how social media algorithms work. Cutting across all four of the areas we have discussed, the environment, health, the economy, and society, will be the role of artificial intelligence. AI will be the very spear point of this age of both danger and excitement. From optimizing energy use in smart grids to helping with drug discovery, from driving up productivity to helping to protect against cyber attacks, AI will play a central role in cultivating resilience through reinvention. We will need new forms of cooperative global governance alongside AI to defeat the threats that this technology can also help create, from new pathogens, more lethal weapons, and more sophisticated cyber attacks. For this reason, we will need to position ourselves at the forefront of this technology, while fully preserving the faculties of the human mind. And nowhere will be more important for doing that than Oxford. So the last 80 years have seen the world move from a chapter of danger with equilibrium to a chapter of excitement with new equilibrium, to today's chapter of danger and excitement with no equilibrium. We now must embrace a new mindset focused on cultivating resilience through reinvention in order to give ourselves the best chance of thriving in this new age of instability and to help the world enter a new fourth chapter, one centered on democracy and cooperation in a new enlightenment in the future. The challenge facing today's young people will be to lead the world into that chapter. It is one of the greatest challenges that any generation has ever encountered. So let all of us, as individuals, as a university, as a country, try to move forward in this new era by adopting, by at least thinking about, resilience through reinvention. For proposals on how to achieve this in practice, we will be looking to the Oxford Martin School. Working together, we can maximize progress across the environment, economy, health, and society, while minimizing the risks. Remember the words of James Martin, because in the face of so many dangers, his inspiring sentence remains true. We can make any kind of world we want. Thank you very much indeed for listening.
William, that was fabulous. That was extraordinarily wide-ranging, sobering in many respects, but with a lot of hope there. We're going to go to questions, and I'll remind people that the lecture and the questions are being broadcast, so please bear that in mind when you ask a question. Also, we will ask you to speak into a microphone, and I'm afraid we can't get a microphone to everyone in the auditorium here, so forgive us if we're someone we can't reach. But I'm going to claim chair's privilege and ask the first question. And William, I'd like you to reflect on your area and politics, and perhaps the greatest change, the greatest trend that has happened in the 40 years you've been in politics has been the rise of polarization, and we've seen that especially in the States, increasingly in this country. And I wonder if you might reflect about what you think is causing that, and whether part of that is, you talked about social media and the echo chamber. And if you have any hope and ideas about how this sort of polarization logjam might be reduced so that we can implement some of the great ideas that you've talked about us today.
Right, well, that's a vast question, taking me straight back into politics. Thank you very much. But it's a very important question. And I do think that the way we communicate is part of the, so that's why I'm repeatedly, you can see what I think of the effect of social media. It's not the technology is neutral. But if it's in an addictive form, it has a fragmenting effect on society. It would do in any organization. Imagine if you tried to run a company by saying, well, I'm going to give half the board of directors one set of information about the company and the other half a totally different set. So the company is doing terribly badly. The first half would say it's doing very well. What would the board meeting be like? I mean, they would never reach agreement on anything. Yet this is now happening with voters who are hearing one story and the other half, certainly this is the case in the United States, hear the other story. Then you expect them to, elect a president who will unite them all. They've got very little chance of doing that. So I think the means of communication is part of it. But of course, it isn't the whole story. That has come on top of legitimate grievances. And we have in many, particularly across Europe, been in a period where people do feel threatened and beleaguered by developments. That may be in their living standards, it may be in rapid changes in society. There was an excellent book a few years ago called the Road to Somewhere, which was about saying that some of us in the world now are anywhere. We could live anywhere. We could prosper and make our living in New York or London or Oxford or Tokyo, and we'd be okay. But that most people are somewheres. They are rooted somewhere. And when things change quickly, they get very destabilized. That might be migration. It might be that they can't find a job anymore. It might be their worry that their children will be worse off than them for the first time in any generations. But it adds up, and they start to despair of politicians who they think have led them for a long time into that situation without asking them about it. So you can see how populist parties really get going. There's not much of an antidote to this except for mainstream parties to really succeed. And I tell people in the Conservative Party, you actually need the Labour government to do well. And in the government, they need the Conservative opposition to be as effective as possible. Because otherwise, both these things are going to fragment on the left and the right into a chaotic situation or a very populist-orientated government of one sort or the other. So that means government has to reinvent itself. And sorry, I'm going on a long time in it, but you've asked me about a vast subject that I have a lot of views about. What are politicians struggling with now? They can't make government work. If you ask Tony, I talked to Tony Blair, my old enemy, I now have nice coffees and breakfasts with him. And he will tell you, if he was sitting here, he would tell you, the hardest thing if you're the Prime Minister is to make something happen. And I can tell you, if you ask Rishi Sunak, he would say that 10 times over. That you sit there and you say, do this, and then 6 months later, somebody's having a meeting about it. And Keir Starmer is clearly experiencing that now. So the best thing we can do for sensible mainstream politicians is redesign government so it works for the modern world. And I think that's a great challenge for the civil service and to young people who will go into that in the future. Otherwise, the populists are going to triumph.
And as you said, tech and AI is going to have an important role there.
Yeah.
Right, we'll go for questions, and I know there'll be lots, so please keep them as succinct as you can. Start with the chap in the blue shirt there. Thank you. And if you might say your name before you give the question.
My name is Om, and as a 16-year-old who aims to go to Oxford one day, what will this university be doing to prepare its students for this new age of danger and excitation?
Well, it will be preparing you for there will be nowhere better to prepare for the era of danger and excitement. I see that in my first months as the Chancellor, I always feel much better about the world every day I've spent in Oxford, which is not true every day I spend in London. It is because, I listed earlier some of the advances that are happening in science and AI. And you can go here, you can go around Oxford and see in the physics department, there are extraordinary things happening. We have quantum computers that are teleporting to each other. We have Oxford scientists working on nuclear fusion not far from here, for the first time getting more energy out than they're putting in. In the chemistry department, they've invented entirely new ways of separating minerals in a vastly more environmentally friendly way that could save the world so much pollution. We've just started a collaboration with the Ellison Institute on AI and vaccine research that could save millions of lives across many diseases in the future. So the reinvention is going on here. And I think what we will all need to add is that resilience to shocks. But you can be sure, if you come to Oxford, there's the great resilience that Oxford has so many aspects to it, with 39 colleges, 4 private halls, 43 institutes and schools, 56 faculties. Whatever we do wrong in Oxford, we don't all do it wrong at the same time. There's always somebody doing something different. And there is a resilience. Why are we here 800 years after our predecessors started a university in Oxford? Because it has had the resilience of that decentralization. And so you won't find a better place to be prepared for this world than in Oxford.
Thank you. Lady with there, and then one over here.
Hello, I'm Anne Lear, and I would like to thank you so much, Lord Hague, for a very insightful, inspirational talk, very much in the spirit of Jim Martin. I also take away that you recognize that we live in a technology-driven era, and that we're placing a lot of hopes on the development of AI. Now, AI doesn't work without infrastructure. And I wanted to ask you a question about the ownership and control of the AI infrastructure. Just this year, we've had over $1 trillion investment in AI data centers. Here in the UK, it's, I think, 15 billion pounds already in development of AI data centers. Who's going to have the keys? Who's going to control? Who's going to govern the AI infrastructure?
Thank you.
I know it's an impossible question to answer, but can you give us some thoughts and the concept of data sovereignty, which I know you're very familiar with?
Yes. No, I was expecting impossible questions, don't worry. And yes, that is one of them. And and this is this is one reason. So 2 or 3 things to say, to think about it, since there isn't an overarching answer to it. One is, first of all, this is why we do have to be at the forefront of the use of AI. Because if we're not, everything that we do can be switched off by somebody else in the future. Now, that will still be a risk, of course. If the AI is all provided by 2 people in America and 1 person in China, there will be the risk anyway, and it gets into every aspect of healthcare and every aspect of the economy and society and everything in your home. Ultimately, somebody could turn it off. And so it's very important to be at the forefront of its development, to understand it, to be able to have our own safeguards as we go on with that. And then it's very important to own some of it. In that second chapter of the history of the world that I keep going back to, the exciting bit of globalization and democracy triumphant, we didn't really worry about who owned anything anymore. You could just buy it and they would always supply it to you. Now we've learnt in the pandemic and recent economic events, they might cut you off the supply. So we have to own some of it here. You have to own the soft. This is why it's so important, not only in the UK to have the talent. We have the talent and the technology. We develop a lot of the technology. We have to have the capital so that some of that is home-owned technology. And we've just had our first 2 unicorn spin-outs from Oxford, the last few, which is a fantastic tribute to the people who created those companies. Their astonishing intellect. 2 companies sold for more than $1 billion that have spun out of this university, but both bought by foreign corporations, one in the United States and one in Japan. Not UK-owned anymore. Ownership is going to matter a lot more. We won't be able to own everything, but we need to own enough that we're at the bargaining table. And so I would say that's perhaps the most important point. And the other one is, in a rational world, we would have some global governance about AI. I mentioned how in the Cold War, US and Soviet scientists were sitting together and did the work that led to the test ban treaty in the end. Now, there are 1 or 2 working groups in the world between the US and China, but they're not with the political will to really come up with agreements on this is not really there at the moment. So I think part of what we can do is at least come up with the ideas for that, so that when there is a leadership wherever in 5 years' time that does have the appetite for it, we've got the ideas, we've suggested the structures. So I think we'll have to work on that as well. I hope that wasn't too bad an attempt at your impossible. Yes, you're nodding, so it was okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much. A question there.
Thanks very much. Lord Hague, fantastic speech. Thank you very much. So Ed Gemmell, I'm the leader of the Climate Party. And we won't be causing more division because we're very centrist pro-business, so it's in the centre. You talked about a new mindset leading us towards resilience through reinvention, fantastic. And then you talked about the dangers in the economy and referred specifically to the OBR, talking about 270% increase on our national debt over the next 50 years. And if I remember rightly, that was even including that we were going to have a 1.5% productivity growth rate throughout that entire period, which we haven't done for a decade, we're not doing now, and is not looking like it's coming in the future. So it'll probably be a lot worse. And can I offer a potential solution tying together some of the things that you were saying going further, is that in fact...
Actually, could we have a question?
Yes, absolutely. We talked about AI and climate being the 2 drivers here of some of the things. And if we tie them both together, looking at where they're going, there'll be 25% of the world economy in 5 years' time. If Britain was to take net zero 2030, industrialize to get that done, and then put a significant proportion of what's coming in those 2 areas there onto our economy, could we not see our economic growth being 10, 20, 30% based on grabbing a huge amount of the world's economy in those areas?
Thank you.
Well, there's a good argument for that. And by the way, I'm trying to support and criticize all political parties. This evening, I'm not being partisan. Yes, let me say, first of all, therefore, good argument for that. And indeed, Lord Stern, Nicholas Stern, who I respect, has just published a book on the only real path to growth is through the whole renewable technology. I think there's a lot in that. You do have to, if you're in government today, though, you have to balance that with the, you also need, you need some cheaper energy now, to get people to invest, to get those, if you actually want to own some of those data centers we were just talking about in this country and have them in this country, they have to have electricity that they can, that competes with the prices in the rest of the world. So it is a more complex mix, actually, in which, and then there's all the security angle, and because I think what you were advocating is a good example of reinvention, but you've got to have the resilience all along the way. And so, as you can tell, I feel very strongly about climate. In my own home, we were talking about, I'm a fanatical planter of trees. I've planted so many trees, you can't see my house anymore. I'm all for that. We have to, the world has to do its utmost to hit net zero, although I don't think it will hit it. So we're going to have to do these other things as well. So I'm totally signed up to that. But, would you then, given that we're still going to be using some oil and gas, even if we hit net zero, are you going to let the US, Russia, and Saudi Arabia be the people last standing who are supplying it to you? So then I wouldn't necessarily close down the whole North Sea. You've got to have the resilience as you do the reinvention. So it's quite a complex, let's try to do as much as we can of what you're advocating. But we have to be resilient at the same time.
Thank you. Further question. There's one just up there, if you can reach.
Hello, my name is Spiros. You mentioned that there is a distinct difference in productivity between UK and United States, and that comes down to IT and technology. And it's generally accepted that there is more risk-taking in the United States, and that's why the IT and the technology is more advanced and used. Do you believe that the encouragement of risk-taking in the UK will get the UK where it should be in terms of technological advancement?
Yes, I do. Yes, and perhaps I should have included that in that new mindset. To get through a period that's, to keep using these words, as dangerous and as exciting as this period is now going to be, you can't really do that without taking some risks. You're going to miss both the upside of the excitement and perhaps do the wrong thing about the dangers if you don't take some risk. And we do struggle with that in the UK. Certainly we do. And our pension funds are much criticized. We have some of the biggest pension funds in the world. Hardly any of them are invested now in our own businesses, in our UK businesses. Maybe 2% of the total assets. And I think both the last government and the new government in Britain can see that. They have what's called the Mansion House agenda, what was called that originally. They're trying to get much more risk capital into businesses. It will, though, need the mindset. And very good article by one of the columnists I read, is Janin Ganesh in the Financial Times. He wrote an article about 6 months ago where he said, everybody's saying in Europe and Britain you've got to have a strategy for growth. So he said, show me the United States strategy for growth. Where is it written down? Who wrote it? Can you amend it? Where's the strategy for growth? And of course, it doesn't have a strategy for growth. It has, as he put it, a bias for growth. That wherever they're facing a choice in government, in business, they will choose the opportunity. Whereas we say, oh, that's a bit risky. And particularly in government, that is true. We have an extreme risk aversion culture. So I think you're right. I will add the next time I give a speech about resilience through reinvention, a bit of risk-taking is unfortunately necessary.
Well, thank you. Question in the front here, if we could have a microphone. David, if you wave your hand.
Thank you very much, Chancellor, for a very wide-ranging lecture, as others have mentioned, and a very challenging one.
And David, just tell us who you are.
David Cooper, I'm a visiting fellow at the Oxford Martin School. I was reflecting as you went through your 3 chapters that perhaps the first of these, we also had the post-war consensus where we saw actually improvements in equality in the UK and across the Western world. Around the inflection point you described, we then went for more liberalization, some reversal in that. And then after the second inflection point, coinciding also with the financial crash, we saw a lot of austerity across the Western world and across the Western democracies. And since then, also a further increase in concentration of wealth and power, including by those that design our technologies, let's say. I wonder if you have any reflections on that and what changes in the economics and the political economy you think are necessary in your fourth chapter.
Oh, we're putting a whole political program together here. No, I think that is an important factor, and I think what's happened in a country like this country is not so much income inequality, but wealth inequality has widened. And I've been critical in the past of central banks, whose response to the financial crisis, and then again to COVID, was really to flood everything with money, which inevitably ends up increasing the asset prices of, not all economists agree about that. But these things have definitely coincided, that there's been a great boom in the value of assets. And so the distribution of wealth is no longer in kilter with the distribution of income. And so I think that's a big problem now in many societies. And some of the happiest and most cohesive societies, democratic societies around the world, don't have such a widespread of wealth inequality as in Scandinavian countries, for instance. I think, however, that tackling that without tackling these things is going to be impossible, because the things I've been talking about earlier, for instance, now we've entered this third chapter of history, you actually do need those people who've accumulated wealth to be here and deploy their capital. We might not like how rich they are, but that is what moves the world. Look at Elon Musk, such a controversial figure. But extraordinary breakthroughs in space technology are being made because this unique individual, struggling for the right word there, deploys his capital with vast intellectual excitement about it. And you've got to have somebody like him. We all need somebody like him in our country. And now it's very controversial that his company is going to pay him $1 trillion, which can't really be. I'm not sure what you do at that point with the money. I don't know what the utility of it is, other than, if he's going to spend $1 trillion on some more great scientific advances, well, that is worth it. So I think we've got to, your concern about it is right, but we're in a situation where we need those people to do that sort of thing. And where we won't address inequality successfully without tackling some of these issues about health and technology. For instance, the whole issue, these issues of obesity, of ultra-processed food. I talked about people caught in the junk food cycle. You won't necessarily lift them out of that, even if they were better off. There are some other things we have to do. That then you end up with a healthier workforce and a happier society. So I don't think it's right to see all the problems through that prism of equality. I think if we got all the things right that I was talking about earlier, we'd actually have a more equal and happier society. But we can't do with that, as we well know in university, where we benefit from great benefactions. The Martin School is an example. The Schwarzman Center, we've just received the largest donation in 500 years to the university. We need those people as well.
Thank you. Lady just there.
Hi, I'm B. Is that working? Yes. I'll sit down. That was a nice segue into my question. I was going to just mention the Schwarzman Centre being based in the Humanities Division now, but having worked with Jim and the team at the Martin School. And one of the things that Jim talked about was the kind of technological changes and improvements, meaning we'll have more leisure time to spend on the things that we enjoy doing, and you referred to that a little bit at the start of your talk. But I just wondered if you could reflect on our kind of humanities role in the kind of excitement for society, and how our historians, philosophers, artists will kind of help us get to a more positive point in history, and where they will feature in this fourth chapter. Thank you.
Well, that's another very important question, to which there is no easy answer, except to say that I think one criterion by which to judge where we're going on AI is, does it make us more human or less human? Because you can imagine a future in which actually it frees us up to be more human, to have more leisure time, to really leverage the power of the human mind in a positive way. It might well even save us altogether. You know, it might be that the improvements in the ways we can produce energy in the future will only be discovered as a result of AI. And James Lovelock argued in his book, Novacine, I don't know if you're familiar with it, he was the scientist who came up with the Gaia theory in the 1970s of the world the Earth as a self-regulating organism. In his book that came out on his 99th birthday a few years ago, he said actually the only way we can save ourselves is to invent a higher form of intelligence. Because otherwise, you know, in effect, to paraphrase, we're too stupid to save ourselves before everything catches up with us, before everything we're doing to the world catches up with us. So, you know, AI could be what saves humanity and gives us the time and the space as well to enjoy being human. It could, of course, also dehumanize. So it could lead to atrophy in the human brain. It could lead to so many people regarding an AI program as their best friend that they go further into loneliness and an inability to function as humans in society. And we therefore face a choice. It wouldn't be a bad principle as we make each choice about AI to ask ourselves, is that use of it going to make us more human or less human? Because something that saves us time so we have more time with our family and friend, well, that's more human. But, you know, a companion bot that you spend hours a day exchanging messages with, that is not only helping with your research, but is your companion on your, every personal or emotional issue, I'd argue you are becoming less human in that situation. So, but how you construct AI so that it helps us with all the research, but doesn't become our best friend. This is what great universities are going to be wrestling with. This is the single biggest challenge in education. Maybe ever. You know, I was saying to the Council of the University in my speech last week, if you look at the whole history of Oxford, 800 years, you can pick the moments where something really big changed. The Reformation, clearly a big one. The 1850s, where the whole notion of what university education was for changed. And the idea that you weren't just imparting a fixed body of knowledge, but trying to add to knowledge. That all changed around then. Then Second World War. Governments realized they needed science in universities because of the war. Three big changes, but arguably this is the biggest of all because it could change the way we teach or the way we think about everything. As well as any idea of what knowledge really is. So this is something, but the Vice-Chancellor spoke about it at length and very well in her oration. And a lot of work is going on on this, as you know, across the university. But it's not a bad idea to always ask, are we getting more human or less human with every decision we take? And always have the bias to be more human.
So we have time for a final question. Who would like to ask that? A gentleman with his hand up just in the center there. Do you want to wave your hand vigorously? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Christian. I'm a DPhil here. Thank you so much, Lord Hague, for the presentation. Really interesting. So I have a really brief question about innovation and global solidarity, as you were talking about. Given that there are many planetary limits, right, that we have seem to have already reached there, right, in terms of the climate and resources, I'm wondering if the next chapter in the book you're writing, right, about the human history, contemporary human history, shouldn't be one of looking to global amendments of national growth, right? Because I'm thinking of Piketty's recent paper, Piketty's lab, about how the colonial exchanges underdeveloped Latin America and Africa as continents. So we keep looking at innovation and the mentality of keep moving forward in places as the US and Europe, when maybe the question should be in the developing economies.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, another very good question. And you're right that one of the dangers here is that all of this takes place in a few countries, and the whole of the rest of the world takes the downsides of that, but not the upsides. Now, that could happen. That is a serious danger. And in Africa, let me talk for a moment about Africa, because I've written several articles about how, in my view, the future of Africa will decide the fate of Europe, which I really think it will, because the demographic change means populations are starting to fall across most of the world, particularly in Europe and East Asia. But in Africa and the Middle East, we expect twice as many people by the middle of the century as there are today, before their own population growth starts to slow down. That's like adding the whole of China to Africa and the Middle East in the next 25 years. So now that will either be the new great socio-economic success, the lifting of vast numbers out of poverty that China was in the last 50 years. Or it will be a disaster that destroys any rational politics in Europe through massive waves of migration. So what happens in Africa will determine the future of Europe, I think. And now that's hard to organize from the outside, or it shows the importance of aid budgets that have been cut back so much in recent years. But it means we do need partners in those countries, and it means when those mega cities, right, there are going to be 30 or 40 million people living in a dozen or so mega cities across Africa of digitally connected young people. They'll only really be there in Indonesia where this, and to some extent India, where that happens. Quite different from the rest of the world. That has to be a success. They have to be great centers of innovation. Otherwise, the politics of the rest of the world becomes impossibly difficult. So I doubt any Western politician can organize that. But they need to have it in their minds. And certainly at Oxford, with people here, there are people at this university from 170 nations and territories around the world. And as you know, there's so much of the work, like the work of the Martin School, is very globally orientated. The work of the Blavatnik School and many others is the students from all over the world. We have to play our part in that future success of Africa. Because otherwise we're all in a mess.
Thank you. I'm afraid we've run out of time. William, you've done many things this evening. You've given an agenda for the Martin School for the next 20 years, and you've given us so much food for thought, both challenging us and optimism as well. Please, would everyone join me to thank Lord Hague.